By contrast, the dominant epistemology today in Western academy, specifically American colleges and universities, is known broadly as postmodernism. Postmodernism includes various philosophical movements such as critical theory. Everything is challenged, especially religious tradition. Deconstructionism, which is the literary method of postmodernism. We'll talk about what that is. Post-structuralism, which seeks to end hierarchical structures. We'll talk about that. And of course, Neo-Marxism, a political ideology. This is really our challenge, postmodernism. We need to understand what it is, how to deal with it, or else this pandemic of ridda, of apostasy, will continue and continue. In contrast to pre-modernism and modernism, postmodernism is a revolt against faith and reason, against religion and rationality. First of all, a quick book recommendation. A book that I greatly benefited from is this book here. It's called Explaining Postmodernism. You can take a look at it after. Explaining Postmodernism, Skepticism and Socialism, from Rousseau to Foucault, by Stephen Hicks, who's at Rockford University in Illinois. It is a brilliant book that not only deals with the philosophy of postmodernism, but its historical development and political underpinnings as well. I've been through 10 years of graduate school in the Bay Area. I'm a professor in a very academically rich environment in Berkeley, so I interact with undergrad and grad students all the time. So I have a bit of experience with the academic culture, really the monoculture, if you will, of modern universities, and its detrimental effects upon religiously confessional students, whether they're Muslim, Christian, or Jewish. This is an Abrahamic crisis. It is an Abrahamic crisis. Postmodernism is everywhere in the academy, really since the 1990s. If you've ever attended a public university, it doesn't matter if you were an English major or a history major or a chemistry major or a math major, you have been subtly indoctrinated by professors espousing postmodernist theories and ideas. There is really no way around it. It is an all-pervasive monoculture. These ideas, in my opinion, are nothing short of satanic, albeit implicitly satanic, and thus absolutely poisonous to religious traditionalists in the academy. And this is what the shaitan does. So we need to understand the modus operandi, the MO of the shaitan. He calls to infidelity. إِذْ قَالَ لِلْإِنسَانِ أُكْفُرْ. It's quoted in the Quran. And shaitan says to the human being, disbelieve. So apostasy, ridda, which is spreading in academia like butter on toast, is usually commensurate with a satanic presence. Apostasy and Satanism go hand in hand. And when you hear about Satan, don't be dismissive. Don't roll your eyes in disdain and ridicule. About a minute ago, when I first mentioned satanic, I actually noticed in this room people kind of smiling and rolling their eyes. This is a gravely important matter if we're believers. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He refers to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as uswatun hasana one time in the Quran. A beautiful example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions al-Islam, the name of our deen, 8 times in the Quran. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the shaitan as adu mubin at least 15 times in the Quran. A clear, open, unambiguous enemy. Just look at a concordance. We need to take Satan seriously. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not mince his words. He is direct. He is straightforward. There is a reason for this repetition. There's an old saying from a popular movie. It says, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. Even a lot of Muslims, if you say, for example, don't go out at night, the demonic presence is very active, or if you say protect yourself with wudu, with azkar, with awrad, they say, really, in this day and age? One of my favorite sayings is actually from Paul in the New Testament. Go figure, Ephesians. Very interesting. He says, our battle is not against flesh and blood, but rather with principalities of darkness in the world and against spiritual wickedness in high places. End quote. I agree. Ours is a spiritual battle against dark forces. So we need to be spiritually powerful and intellectually formidable. Now, explicit Satanism, in theory and practice, is very much alive in the world today, whether in the form of Crowleyan black magic, which is called Goetia, which is literally conjuring of demons, also known as thelema. Thelema in Greek means will, W-I-L-L, right? Because their credo is do what you will. Again, intimating the primacy of the will over the intellect. You also have something called Levian Satanism, also known as selfism or egolatry. I referred to that earlier, also known as the Church of Satan, which is essentially taking your hawasha, referred to as being Dionysian, right? In contrast to being Apollonian. Being Apollonian after Apollo means to give reason primacy. Reason is your guide. But to be Dionysian means to let your desires be your guide. After the Greek god Dionysus, the son of Zeus, who was born from his father's thigh near his crotch. Thus he's the god of wine, entertainment, pleasure, frivolity, self-indulgence, right? So freedom from religious law and absolute self-determinism are the dual principles of Satanists. Freedom from religious law and absolute self-determinism. This idea, I don't need God and I can do whatever I want. Or as Elsa sang in the popular Disney movie, Frozen, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. So if Satan is our enemy and we wish to do battle against him, then we need to know our enemy, his ways, his mentality, his philosophy, his tools, his minions. How can you make spiritual warfare against an enemy if you're ignorant of that enemy? Know your enemy. There was a wise man, Kung-Fu-Tzu, also known as Confucius, the greatest of the axial age sages of the Iron Age. He said, and I love this quote from him, tradition civilizes us, education perfects us. There's incredible profundity in that statement. In other words, we must look to our past, our golden age, and determine which principles and virtues led to such human flourishing, to capture the zeitgeist of that age. And this is not to, foolishly romanticize the past. That's not the goal here. There are certainly aspects of pre-modernism that we want to avoid. No, we're talking about virtues that led to intellectual and moral flourishing. We're not talking about cultural or political aspects. We need to identify those virtues, and then every single device of education should be utilized to inculcate those virtues within our children in the present age. So our pedagogical methods must rely on tried and tested tradition. The word pedagogy in Greek comes from pais, means child, and ago, which means to lead a child, right? We say tarbiyah in Arabic. Rabba, yurabbi means to guide someone in stages, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Rabbul Alameen. He's the one that takes care of us in stages. Your parents are a type of arbab, a type of Lord's lowercase l. Kama rabbayani saghira, right? That's what we say. The dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us in the Quran, have mercy on me, have mercy on them. Irhamhuma kama rabbayani saghira, as they raised me up in childhood. So tarbiyah is very important. This is why Hadith al-Rahmah, which I have here on the slide in English, the hadith of compassion from Musnad Ahmad is the first hadith that Muslim children learn according to traditional Islamic curriculum. Rahmah is the greatest virtue. Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhumur Rahman, irhamu man fil ard, yarhamukum man fis sama. Kama qala alayhi salatu wasalam. Underline the word compassion. The most compassionate shows compassion to those who show compassion. Show compassion to those on earth, and the one in heaven will show you compassion. Compassion, 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 compassion. This was chosen by our ulama because they want to drill into the mind of the child that compassion is indeed the greatest virtue. So the ulama, they looked back at the Prophet ﷺ, who was a paragon of virtue, who said, Ana Nabiyur Rahma, I am the Prophet of mercy. Ana Rahmatun Muhda, I am a gifted mercy. They look back at the Quran, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةٍ لِلْعَالَمِينَ فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ, these ayat. However, in contrast to this Confucian deliberate tradition, as it is called, deliberate tradition, traditional value systems in general are perceived as the enemies of humanity by postmodernists. Traditional value systems are inherently oppressive, they claim, because they are hierarchical and patriarchal. So we have to get into these terms. These are the buzzwords, right? You have to understand the nomenclature of the postmodernists. They love these two words, especially the latter one. I imagine postmodernists rewording that profound Confucian aphorism to say, tradition oppresses us, and education should politicize us. Because postmodernism and politics are inextricable, cannot be separated. I'll come back to this idea. This postmodern revolt against tradition has now actually affected our popular films. So hypocritical Hollywood, sometimes called Hellywood, hella weird, with its putrid and shameless culture of transactional sex, prostitution, self-aggrandizement, holds in its hand one of the most powerful tools by which to indoctrinate masses of human beings. I mean, you just think about the popularity of the Star Wars franchise. Tens of millions of people over the last 40 years are obsessed with Star Wars. But ever since Disney has taken over in 2012, Star Wars has noticeably changed its tone. For example, in The Last Jedi, Kylo Ren says to Rey, both millennials, we would call them, quote, let the past die, kill it if you have to, end quote. That is quintessentially postmodernism. Now, when I say that postmodernism is poisonous to religious traditionalism in colleges and universities, again, I'm referring to Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, the Abrahamic faith tradition. Okay. Abraham is pronounced Avraham in Hebrew. It literally means father of many nations, right? Ab, alif, ba, abun means father. The word for father in Greek and Latin is pater. Abraham is the patriarch of our religion. Millata abikum Ibrahim. Right? It is the tradition of your patriarch, your father, Abraham. Isa alayhi salam is quoted to have said in the New Testament in Greek, Etekna tu Abraham ete, ta erga tu Abraham apoyete an. He says to the Pharisees, if you were truly Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. So when you hear postmodernist professors of the social sciences rage against the oppression, tyranny, and eventual overthrow of the patriarchy, the rule of the father, now you know who they're talking about. It's Abraham, Ibrahim alayhi salam, who is called the friend of God in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, in the New Testament, and in the Quran. Aleister Crowley, who's the famous Satanist, he said this in the early 20th century, he said, we are moving away from the age of the patriarch and into the age of Horus, as he called it, the age of the child. Horus is the son of Osiris and Isis, the age of rebellion, irresponsibility, and hedonistic self-indulgence, an age of antalid al-amatu rabbataha, when the girl will give birth to her master, the age of extended adolescence, the age of the phenomenon of the 40-year-old man-child or woman-child, what's known technically as paraphilic infantilism. Check this out. There's actually an entire subculture of adults who choose to live as children. This is also called age play. The most famous example, a 52-year-old man recently in Canada with 7 kids decided to leave his wife and children to live as a 6-year-old girl. He has pigtails, he wears dresses, right? This is what's happening. You also have an entire subculture of adults living as dogs. It's called pup play. And what a surprise, the vast majority are homosexual men, smelling each other's behinds. So this is an age of shamelessness, of doing what thou wilt, which is of course again the credo of Crowleyan Satanists. It's interesting, there's a hadith in the Arba'in of Imam Nawawi. The Prophet ﷺ says, I'm going to tell you something that every prophet told his people. إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحْيِي فَاسْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ. If you have no shame, then do what thou wilt. Right? So it's not, okay, I don't have any shame, I'll do it. No. The point is, you have to have shame. You can't do what thou wilt. Now with that said, imagine an 18-year-old Quran and Sunnah believing student entering into these institutions, institutions that have literally declared ideological warfare on Abrahamic morality. What do you expect will happen to his faith if he is not prepared for the intellectual battlefield? He'll be ripped apart, chewed up, and spit out. Let's talk more specifically about postmodernism. Let's unpack the ideology a bit more. Now, chances are you've come across names like Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, Jean-Francois Lyotard, Stanley Fish, Richard Rorty, Frank Lantricchia, Andrea Dworkin. If their names are not familiar, their ideas will be, certainly. They are the major players. Point number 1 about postmodernism. Postmodernism rejects ultimate or absolute truth. There is no ultimate or absolute truth, they say. You have to find your own subjective truths, plural, with a lowercase t. Live your truth, as Oprah says. There is no true self in God's image to be actualized by disciplining your desires. As I mentioned earlier, takhalluk and tahaqquk. You must invent your true self. Self-invention. By engaging your desires. I saw another movie about a month ago called Avengers. It was a commercial before the movie that caught my eye. It's a 30-second commercial. You have this young woman, millennial. She has a t-shirt with a rainbow on it, a homosexual advocate. And these are direct quotes. She says, look, here's the thing about Diet Coke. It's delicious. It makes me feel good. Life is short. Just do you. They love that. Just do you. Whatever it is. Diet Coke. Because I can. Beautiful. Again, quintessential postmodernism. Right before the movie. I couldn't even enjoy the movie. Just do me? Okay, what if I like to torture animals? Just do me? Ajib and gharib. Postmodernist philosophy here is actually self-contradictory. To say that there is no absolute truth is to make a statement that is absolutely true. In other words, they're saying the only absolute truth is that there is no absolute truth. Postmodernists tend to be radically skeptical about everything, right, except their own skepticism. However, contradictions don't seem to bother them because the intellect has been devalued. Point number 2, postmodernism denies objective morality. As we said, you have this strain of nominalism where formal and final causes are rejected. Morality is totally fluid, they say, and relative. Now, the asas, the foundation of the Abrahamic tradition, is love of God and love of your fellow human being. And that is absolutely fundamental. If you read the New Testament, if you read rabbinical writings, talk to a rabbi, talk to a pastor, Imam al-Razi, he defined Islam. He said, al-ibadatu lil-khaliq wa rahmatu lil-khalq. He said Islam is the worship of the Creator and showing compassion towards the creation. However, as Abrahamic believers, this is a very important point. We don't conflate acceptance with love necessarily. We don't conflate acceptance with love. In other words, we can love people and simultaneously consider some of their behavior as morally reprehensible. Postmodernists tend to conflate love with acceptance, so this idea that if you really loved your transgender cousin, you would accept him totally for who he or she or she is. Z-E, an actual pronoun, one of the many pronouns that people in the academy have fabricated that are now, at least in Canada, have proposed laws to compel people to use. Now this leads to another contradiction in postmodernist philosophy. Postmodernists are highly intolerant of intolerance. It is as if they say, respect everyone, you idiot. I remember, just do you, that's called virtue signaling, right? That sounds like the right thing to say, but they don't actually practice it. What they mean is, just do you, as long as you agree with me, and if you don't, then you're a bigot. You need to change your beliefs. I was a tutor at the GTU for a while, tutoring a Christian sister in Hebrew, kind of strange, Muslim guy tutoring a Christian student in Hebrew. Anyway, she saw me a few months after our tutoring sessions from a distance, and she said, "Adi," and she wanted to give me a hug. And I said, "No, I don't hug." She said, "What?" I said, "I don't hug women." And I had to explain it to her. She said, "Really?" She put out her hand and wanted to shake my hand. So I don't shake hands. So she said, "I'm so offended." She was serious. "I'm so offended. You won't shake my hand because I'm a woman?" So I turned the tables on her, right? I played the victim, right? And I told her I was doing this. I said, "What? You're offended? I'm an oppressed minority in America. I have brown skin. I'm a Muslim. And my religious beliefs offend you? I'm offended you're offended." She said, "Oh my God. You're so right." I said, "I'm just kidding." But this is why traditional or religiously confessional students, mu'mineen, are so reluctant, that is to say, afraid, to take a theological or moral stance in a university classroom. To say, for example, that pantheism or incarnationalism is incorrect theology, or to say that homosexuality is sexually perverse, is to invite upon oneself a hailstorm of ad hominem epithets, such as arrogant, ignorant, antiquated, dogmatic, homophobic, transphobic, bigoted traditionalists. Postmodernists are dogmatically opposed to dogma. Point number 3. Postmodernist literature is often convoluted, incoherent, and condescending. It is form way over substance. Its pseudo-profundity is often perceived by young believers in college as just too deep and insightful for me to understand. They think to themselves, I must be an idiot. I just don't get it. Right? It's kind of like modern art. I don't know if you've ever been to a museum of modern art. My daughter took a class, she took a college class, and so we took a field trip to the MoMA in San Francisco, the Museum of Modern Art. We were there for about 15 minutes. We scratched our heads and left. So there is this, wallahi, there is this portrait. It was completely blank, and it's called The Mirror. And there's this crowd of people looking at it going, oh, wow. What is this? It's so profound. And I kind of look at my daughter like, are we looking at the same thing? There was this pile of sticks in the corner. Pile of sticks. And people were looking at it. Amazing sculpture. Amazing work. There was another one, wallahi. I felt like my 4-year-old could have done a better job. It was crayon scribbles. Wallahi. It was crayon scribbles. Yeah. And people looking at it, wow. People were like having these cathartic experiences. We assume it must be deep and profound because it's in a museum, but it's the emperor's new clothes. There's nothing there. This is how their literature is. Postmodernist literature, it sounds deep and profound. It is nonsense. Nonsense. They actually give an award, an annual reward, to who can write the most incoherent text. And this professor at UC Berkeley, this Methodist professor, she keeps winning the award. It's just this kind of speak they have amongst each other. They purposely write incoherently to impress each other. It's nonsense. Anyway, these believers, because of this, they feel a strong sense of inadequacy and embarrassment for both their inability to grasp the convoluted literature and for their, quote, simple belief in God, morality, right and wrong, and after. They're actually scared to say, I believe in this, I think this is right, I think that's wrong. They're ridiculed, right? For many of these young believers, there are only two viable options. I call it selling out or checking out. In other words, attempt to change the very face of the religion in order to mitigate the hurt feelings of certain individuals who are offended by the morality in religious texts, or to leave the religion altogether because they just don't want to deal with it. So the sellout says, yes, I'm Muslim, but I don't believe in this or that verse in the Quran or this or that hadith. The checkout says, Muslim? No, not anymore. I used to be, but now I'm enlightened. The most infamous of the postmodern philosophers was a Frenchman, one Michel Foucault. Died in 1984, but continues to be an absolute rock star in universities all around the world. He famously said, quote, it is meaningless to speak in the name of or against reason, truth, or knowledge. It is meaningless to speak of or against reason, truth, or knowledge. And he was a product of the trend, what's known as a continental philosophy in the history of Western philosophy. If you studied it, this is philosophy from the mainland of Europe that was prevalent in the 19th and 20th centuries. A philosophy that was becoming less and less confident in truth, reason, and objective reality. A philosophy that's represented by Immanuel Kant, right? The critique of pure reason, or Kierkegaard, we need to crucify reason. However, Kant and Kierkegaard both believed in God, they were Christians, but then you have the atheistic irrationalist Friedrich Nietzsche, who called the human intellect, quote, pitiful, and that emotion, drive, ambition, will, and desire should be our guides. Foucault is even more radical. By the way, Foucault was a drug-addicted homosexual Maoist who died of AIDS in 1984. He actually fell in love with the pre-AIDS San Francisco gay bar scene of the early 1980s. Foucault also had a profound effect on the Muslim majority world as well. He was a professor of psychology at the University of Tunis from 1966 to 1968. Right? Truth, reason, and knowledge. Aql, or mantiq, haqq and ilm are meaningless, he says. Noam Chomsky, it's interesting. He actually says, Noam Chomsky, you know Chomsky, he's a professor of linguistics at MIT. He says that postmodernism is even more, quote, grotesque in the Muslim world than in the Western world. Right? He says he goes to universities in the Middle East all the time, and he's always called naive because he speaks about truth and objective history. They say that's old-fashioned. So reason is meaningless, they say. Now reason is limited, that's true, but is it meaningless? Can we really not know anything? So how many times do we find in the Quran phrases like أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ? We must place some confidence in the intellect, in reason. Now Muslim theologians like Ibn Taymiyyah, he said that aql and naql, reason and revelation, are not in conflict, but that the proper use of the former will lead to the recognition of the latter because they come from the same source. They're both from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam al-Ghazali says in his Qistas al-Mustaqim that the Quran itself appeals to logic through syllogistic arguments long before Hellenistic influences upon Muslim theological discourse. The prophets in the Quran use logic and reason to appeal to their respective communities because logic and reason have efficacy. For example, in the Quran, Badi' as-samawati wal-ard, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is called Badi', which is the efficient cause, the originator of the laysa kamithlihi shay'un. There is nothing like him whatsoever. He transcends space, time, and materiality. Cause and effect do not apply to him, or else you're stuck in infinite regress, which is repugnant to the intellect. That's just one example. So if you're a Muslim educator, professor, a chaplain, a teacher, from graduate school to Sunday school, it is your duty to say to these young people, Sadaq Allah. Allah speaks the truth. فَاتَّبِعُوا مِلَّةِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. Follow, have ittiba'. What is ittiba'? Adherence to imitation. Adhere to the tradition of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the archetypal monotheist. Edward Lane, he actually says that in his famous lexicon, that ittiba' always has an element of imitation, mimesis. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the Quran, لا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان. Don't adhere to the footsteps of Satan. فَإِنَّهُ يَأْمُرُ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنكَرِ. Because he calls or he orders to perversity and falsehood. Perversity and falsehood. So these words are in the Quran. They have meanings. They're normative definitions. They are defined by the Quran and Sunnah. The Quran is theologically and morally judgmental. You cannot avoid it. Everybody is judgmental. Everybody. The Quran is theologically and morally judgmental. And we must be prepared with reason to defend those judgments without apology. Even if people have discounted reason, continue to be reasonable. It is our reason that makes us human. It is our differentia, as Aristotle said. We are the rational animal. Reason will win in the end. Emotional incontinence cannot be sustained. People get tired of emotion, but they will not tire of reason. So we must employ dialectic. Dialectic is the Socratic method. What is dialectic? Dialogue and debate based on asking and answering questions to stimulate critical thinking in order to tease out the truth, true knowledge, as opposed to rhetoric. Dialectic leads to knowledge, right? Rhetoric leads to opinion. What is rhetoric? Sophistry. Just trying to get your own opinion across. You don't care about truth. It's like a defense lawyer who knows his client is guilty, but he doesn't care. He's not trying to get to the truth. He's trying to get his client acquitted. He only cares about persuasion. So Aristotle said there are three modes of persuasion. It's very important. 3 modes of persuasion, of effective communication. These are the Greek terms. They're pronounced logos, ethos, and pathos. Logos, or logos, is a reference to logic. You're using facts and figures. Right? Ethos is a reference to the speaker himself or herself, that they have a good disposition, that they have a good reputation. And then pathos is its emotional appeal. So the rhetorician, the sophist, primarily appeals to pathos. He wants to emotionally manipulate you. Whereas the dialectician primarily appeals to logos and ethos, because he wants to get to the truth. In the Quran, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbik," call to the way of your Lord, bil hikmah wal maw'idatil hasana, with wisdom. And the ulama say here, the meaning of this is with dala'il, rational aqli, and scriptural proof texts. Right? With logos, wal maw'idatil hasana, and with a good disposition, with good ethos. Wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan, and debate with them in ways that are better than what they're doing. They're sophists, they're rhetoricians. They're going to play the victim. You've offended me. They're going to use ad hominem attacks. Keep your cool and use facts and figures. Use logic. Use logos. Use appeal to the intellect. So our young people need prophetic advice. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, قُلِ الْحَقِّ وَإِنْ كَانَ مُرًّا وَلَا تَخَفِّ اللَّهِ لَوْمَةَ لَائِمٍ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Speak the truth, even if it's bitter. قُلِ الْحَقِّ, there is truth. It's not relativism. He says, speak the truth, even if it's bitter. And don't be afraid of people. Morality is not subjective. Truth is real. Falsehood is real. We need to stand up for it. Stop being afraid. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ to give me some advice. He said, قُلْ آمَنْتُ بِاللَّهِ ثُمَّ اسْتَقِمْ. He said, say, I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and be theologically and morally steadfast upon that. And I always say this, if people think you're weird, that's fine. The Prophet said, فَتُوبَ لِلْغُرَبَاءِ, glad tidings to the weirdos. We should be weird. In this day and age, if we're not weird, we're doing something wrong. Really, wallahi. We should stand out. And if people disagree with you, fine. لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. You ever heard of that? You ever thought about that? You have your religion, I have my religion. You have your way of life, I have my way of life. You have your theological beliefs, or lack thereof. You have your ideas of morality and nature and nurture and all of that, and so do I. Don't tell me what to say or do. I won't tell you what to say or do. This should really be our attitude, right? Because we're living in the Meccan phase. It was revealed in Mecca, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Whoever wants to believe, let him believe. Whoever wants to disbelieve, let him disbelieve. You will hear أَذًا كَثِيرًا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran. You will hear a lot of annoying discourse that's going to grieve you, right? وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ مِنْ عَزْمِ الْأُمُورِ. But if you are patient and you guard against evil, that's going to be the determining factor. That's what's going to count. Be patient and guard against evil. Don't be a sellout. Life is supposed to be a bit difficult. The dunya is supposed to be difficult. Dunya means the low adna, the low world. The lowest world. That's what happens here. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that Surat Hud wa akhawatuha turned my shayyabatni. He said that these group of surahs, they turned my hair gray because the tanzil was so strong upon him. And then he singled out one ayah in particular, ayah 112 of Surat Hud, فَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ. Be upright as you have been commanded. He found that difficult, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Physically, it's difficult. But we have to go through it. Life is short. Don't sell out. Right? Don't check out. Okay. Now, the literary method of postmodernists is called deconstructionism. According to Deconstructionism, no one interpretation of a text, such as a religious text, i.e. the Quran, should be privileged over other readings. They love this word privilege. Social sciences aside, even the hard sciences are like physics, biology, they're feeling the pressure of postmodernist thinkers. There's a French feminist philosopher. When I say feminist, I'm talking about third wave feminism. I'm not talking about first wave where there's equal rights. We have no problem there. Second wave, there's a revolt against gender roles, a little problematic. Third wave is about body autonomy and taking down the patriarchy and replacing it with a matriarchy. What does that mean? The right to abort babies and taking down men and ruling them. This is the essence of third wave feminism. There's a French third wave feminist philosopher named Irigaray. She said, get this, you can't make this stuff up, folks. The equation E equals MC squared is sexist. I'm going to let that marinate for a minute. What? Why? Because it privileges the speed of light over other light. Apparently there are now an infinite number of genders. Aql and naql, reason and scripture, say there are two genders, XY, XX, dhakar, untha. We are told by postmodernists, social scientists, we're told by Zuckerberg, we're told by gender theorists at the university. Gender theory, interesting. We're told by gender theorists at the university that people who maintain this rigid binary are bigots. You're just not woke. Get woke. Get a book, not get woke. Why Gender Matters. Dr. Leonard Sachs. Extraordinary text. Before it's banned, and I mean that, California Assembly Bill 2943 already proposed the banning of books that are offensive to the LGBTQIA community. California legislation is trying to ban books that seek to reform homosexuals and declare them hate speech. What is the natural progression? This makes Christians very nervous because homosexuality in the Bible is immoral. We say, well, good riddance, Christianity. No, wrong attitude. They come for you tonight, they're coming for us in the morning. We're next. A great American Muslim scholar once said, Shaitan wants to change the immutables to mutable. Shaitan wants to change thawabit. What are thawabit? Thawabit are underlying principles, axiomatic, self-evident truths. He wants to change those into variables, mutaghayyarat. These things can change. He wants to lay to waste our underlying principles. There are classical laws of thought, such as the principle of identity, the principle of non-contradiction. So male is male and not male is not male. There are 3,500 biological differences between men and women. وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. The Quran says the man, the male, is not like the female. There are gender roles rooted in biology. Rooted in biology. What I just said could get me expelled from a university classroom, by the way. There are gender roles rooted in biology, in khalq, our khalq. It is not purely a social construct or a feeling. There's an article in the Huffington Post, some people call it the Huffington Compost, where there's a picture of a man sitting on a park bench, looks like a man, with a blood stain in his crotch, holding a sign that says, men get periods too. Turns out, that is a biological woman, dressed up like a man. So the headline should be, woman gets period. Wow. If you're a man, putting on your grandmother's shoes doesn't make you an old woman, any more than barking like a dog makes you a dog. American slaves living in the antebellum South, the pre-Civil War South, had a suicide rate that high. People who were separated from their families, treated like animals, and utterly brutalized do not have a suicide rate the rate of some suburban transgender in 2018. Interesting. Clearly, gender identity syndrome, which is what it used to be called, now they call it gender dysphoria. Gender identity syndrome is a mental illness in adults. But now it is politically incorrect to say that. It is politically incorrect to say that. Something that will help people, you cannot say. There is a confirmed mental illness, according to the APA, called body integrity identity disorder. Body integrity identity disorder. This is when a person feels the need to amputate his or her healthy body parts. But when a 12-year-old girl feels like she's a boy and wants to amputate her breasts, she is called brave, courageous, and a hero. Be yourself. Do you. Just go get it. Right? Get it. Amazing. There was a Google engineer, James Damore, I don't know if you've heard of him, who was fired from Google because he wrote a memo suggesting that biological differences between men and women help explain the differences of their career choices. He's absolutely right. And he was fired because it's not PC to say that. In other words, the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, contain more men than women because women are not nearly as interested in those fields as men are. There are also a lot more men in construction, sanitation, and plumbing because women are not interested in those jobs. From a theological standpoint, it is Satan who wants to blur the lines of gender. This is why Baphomet, which is the official symbol of the Church of Satan, is usually depicted as androgynous, clearly the body of a man with female breasts, because he shatters the gender binary. Baphomet is woke, apparently. There's a good hashtag for you. Hashtag Baphomet is woke. Now, I'm going to come back to deconstructionism, but I want to talk more about homosexuality. This is a big, big issue in the academy. This is the social issue. Homosexual advocates are making this into a civil rights issue. Now, as believers, when we engage, we should engage in dialectic. Because we should know that if we appeal to the Quran, it is then a logical fallacy. Someone who doesn't believe in the Quran is asking you, why don't you accept homosexuality as a lifestyle? And if you say, well, it's in the Quran, that's called an argument from unqualified authority, because they don't believe in that authority. You have to give secular arguments. You have to use dialectic. Okay? There's this conservative YouTuber, I don't agree with everything he says, obviously, but he has this interesting thing where he goes around interviewing people on the street. Usually they're millennials, or in that age range. I hate to pick on them, but it's okay. My kids are almost at that age. They're not all the same, right? Okay. So he goes up to someone and he says, how do you feel about a man marrying another man? How do you feel about a man marrying another man? And this person says, yeah, why not? Two consenting adults. What's wrong with that? To each his own. Whatever floats your boat. Right? He says, okay, two consenting adults. That's right, of course. Okay, how do you feel about a man marrying his daughter that are both consenting adults? And they say, no, I don't agree. And then he says, what? Are you an incest phobe? That's all you have to do. Throw out the ad hominem. Are you an incest phobe? Oh, no? I guess it's, as long as they don't have kids. What? Are you denying my right to have children? No. And you can see them one by one. Okay, nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong. As long as they're not hurting anyone. Right? The CDC What is CDC?
Center of Disease.
Center of Disease Control. According to them, homosexuals are 2% of the population, homosexual men, yet account for 78% of HIV cases. 2% account for 78% of HIV cases. 83% of syphilis. There's a group, Americans for Truth About Homosexuality, AFTA, that you can do some research on. More than 1 out of 10 homosexual men is incontinent. If you don't know what that means, look it up. I've read from 12% to 25% of homosexual men are incontinent. The Kinsey Institute published a study by Bell and Weinberg from 1978, finding that promiscuity among homosexual men is through the roof. Check this out. 28% of homosexual men have had sexual encounters with 1,000 or more partners. Multiple studies have shown that casual sex causes depression, anxiety, and mental illness. Now, 79% of that 28% said that more than half of their partners were complete strangers. So if you go to gay bars, gay movie theaters, gay dance clubs, they have these back rooms that actually cater to this type of thing. This is clearly a mental illness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intimates that homosexual promiscuity is a mental illness in the Quran. La amruka. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says directly to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is the only time which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath by the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is a big oath. La amruka innahum lafi sakratihim ya'mahun. By your life, they are indeed in their wild intoxication, wandering blindly. Homosexuality is transforming the very fabric of society. It is destroying the traditional nuclear family. It spreads disease and a culture of irresponsibility. Several studies have shown that same-sex relationships do not last nearly as long as heterosexual relationships. So children end up suffering due to these highly dysfunctional relationships. Use the argument from nature, from natural selection. Put 1 million homosexual men on an island, give them the best technology, cutting-edge health care. In 100 years, everyone is dead. Nature selects. Now, a common argument, and this is coming from Muslim homosexual apologists, is that why would Allah create them like that? Right? Now, first of all, there's no scientific evidence whatsoever of a gay gene. So this whole idea of born this way, right, the Lady Gaga anthem, is a lie. One could certainly make the argument that homosexuality is the result of trauma suffered during the development of one's brain in early childhood. So something like divorce, rejection by a father or a mother, sexual molestation, being physically abused. Dr. Omar Johnson, who counsels African American youth, he says, and he's a clinical psychologist for something like 20 years, to 95% of the black youth that come to him that identify as homosexual are victims of trauma in childhood. The other thing is, how would a gay gene even survive natural selection? Wouldn't nature weed it out eventually? It doesn't seem to be happening, it seems to be growing. Evolutionary biologist and anti-theist polemicist Richard Dawkins over at Oxford University, evolutionary biologist, he really doesn't have an answer. He doesn't know. He has some theories that I won't go into, but one of them, he says, is, well, maybe it's because maybe babies that feed from a bottle turn gay, and those who breastfeed are straight. This is according to Richard Dawkins. This is their main man. Interesting. Well, going back to this question, why would Allah create them like that? Let's just entertain the premise for now. Okay, that's how they were created. This is similar to the transgender thing. What about a child born in the Congo into abject poverty, to a single mother who is HIV positive because of a vaccine that she took, yet that child never complains? Welcome to the dunya. Life is hard. we are in no position to judge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are children born blind with major mental and physical disabilities. This is qadar. There are men who are born with proclivities towards children. Do we ask, why did Allah create them like that? No, we expect them not to act out on their perversions. Okay, switching gears here, go back to Deconstructionism. According to Deconstructionism, there are no right and wrong readings of any text. There are no true and false readings. The idea of a meta-narrative. A meta-narrative is to say the standard interpretation of a text that shape religious orthodoxy. These are summarily rejected by postmodernists. All readings are valid and equally important, they say. What is demanded, what is only demanded, according to another infamous postmodernist American professor named Stanley Fish, is to be, quote, interesting. Just be interesting. Not to be right or correct, because right, correct, normative, orthodox, these do not exist, according to them. Just be interesting. As long as it's entertaining, as long as it feels great. So now we have in religious departments and seminaries a method of interpretation known as radical hermeneutics. Radical hermeneutics of sacred texts, like queer hermeneutics. For example, we have Muslims in the seminary justifying homosexuality based on the Quran. I don't know how on earth one would even do that, but they managed to do it somehow. They say things like, no, the Quran is not forbidding homosexual acts. It's only saying not to rape each other. Which is interesting because in the Quranic narrative, Lut alayhi salam, he says to the men that are coming to seduce the other men, he says to them, take my daughters instead. And Ibn Kathir, Imam al-Tabari, they say the meaning of that is marry the women of my ummah instead of having relations with the men. That's the meaning of that. If the Quran is only denouncing their rape, then what is Lut alayhi salam actually saying? Rape my women, rape my daughters instead of the men? No, that's not what he's saying. But this is, as long as it's interesting, don't worry about contradictions. You can put it out there and get your master's degree and get a professorship, and you can travel around the country, and you can engage in this nonsensical academic speak, but nobody understands except a few of your colleagues, and you can go back in the back room and drink and laugh about it later. Queer hermeneutics, transgender hermeneutics, third wave feminist hermeneutics, Neo-Marxist hermeneutics. It is a... So the quest for truth, or the intended authorial meanings of a text, are abandoned, rather sacrificed upon the altar of self-interest and feelings. So things like grammar, logic, rhetoric, syntax, definitions, consistency, context, who cares? Scripture now bends to accommodate us, not us to accommodate it. Rather than interrogating our own positions in light of Scripture, we interrogate Scripture in light of our own positions. In short, Scripture can now mean whatever we want it to mean. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, there will come a time upon the people, لا يبقى من الإسلام إلا اسمه, that nothing will remain of Islam except its name. It's just a nomen, a name without a reality. No essence, no normative definition, totally subjective. This hadith indicates that there is indeed an orthodox normative definition of Islam. It's not defined by our feelings, it's defined by Allah and His Messenger. وَلَا يَبْقَى مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ إِلَّا رَسْمُهُ. Nothing will remain of the Quran except its script. It's just words on a page, deprived of their true meanings. Couple of hadith of our Master Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. يكون في آخر الزمان دجالون كذابون يأتونكم من الأحاديث بما لم تسمعوا أنتم ولا آباؤكم. At the end of time, there are going to be flagrant, habitual liars, imposters, will make statements that neither you nor your ancestors or forefathers have ever heard. In other words, according to the ulama, they will say things that are absolutely irreconcilable with our faith tradition that no Muslim has ever heard, yet they will justify themselves religiously. This is already rampant in biblical studies. I have an MA in biblical studies. My former academic advisor, who is now the director of New Testament studies at the College of the Holy Cross, a Jesuit school on the East Coast. This man said, and there's a huge uproar about it, he said, I'm not going to say, but one of the greatest prophets, he said, was, quote, a gay, gender-fluid drag king. This is postmodern, radical hermeneutics at its worst. La yudillunakum. Beware of them. Wala yuftinunakum. Lest they misguide you or involve you in their fitna. What is the role of the ulama during this troublesome time? The hadith al-Bayhaqi, يحمل هذا العلم من كل خلف عدوله ينفون عنه تحريف الغالين وانتحال المبتلين وتأويل الجاهلين أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. This sacred knowledge will be borne by reliable authorities of each successive generation. They will remove from it the alterations of those guilty of exaggeration, the plagiarism of the corrupt, and the interpretations of the ignorant. This is my 10th slide. I only have 11. Another pillar of postmodernism is named Frank Lantricchia. He said that the very purpose of a college education is to exercise power for the purpose of social change, not to pursue virtue or truth. Why? Because truth is meaningless and virtues are relative. Everything is power plays. Life is all about power, they say. Human beings don't act out of piety or morality. They just want power. In other words, according to postmodernists, the only worthwhile purpose of a college education is to create political activists. So postmodernism clearly has Marxist underpinnings, which are further highlighted by its relentless demand for radical egalitarianism in order to create some sort of communist, godless, raceless, genderless, classless utopia on earth where technology reigns supreme. Now, we have to pursue justice, no doubt about it. But infinite justice, spoiler alert, will never be recognized, will never be achieved, will never be actualized in the dunya. Never. That's the whole point of Yawm al-Qiyamah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-adil. He is the absolutely just. It's only on that day will it will manifest. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't work towards justice on the earth. Of course we do. Imam al-Qurtubi said the basis of our sharia is adala, is justice. Of course. But this unnatural obsession for earthly justice, to the point where I go to an MSA at a university and the students aren't praying. They'd rather go protest than pray. What's going on? Very strange. And when I tell them we should pray, it takes priority, they look at me like I'm some sort of mullah. What is this mullah talking about? He's out of touch. He's an old man. I'm not as old as others. So they espouse the misguided proposition that inequality is always due to inequity. In other words, if another social group is doing better than your group, then you must be victims of their oppression. This is this type of explanatory monism. There are no other factors, they say. It's always oppression. Why are these ideas detrimental to believers? Because they completely eliminate gratitude, shukr. They foster this idea that everyone's out to get me and I'm a perpetual victim. There's no time to be grateful. Shukr and kufr are just juxtaposed in the Quran. They're antonyms. They're opposites. فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ وَاشْكُرُوا لِي وَلَا تَكْفُرُونَ. Remember me or have regard for me so that I might have regard for you. Be grateful to me and don't disbelieve. In other words, to be ungrateful is to disbelieve. In other words, the word kafir in Arabic means ingrate. They eliminate, this philosophy eliminates shukr. It eliminates humility, tawadu', this idea of if I'm not progressing in the dunya, maybe I'm doing something wrong. What have I done? No, you're a victim. They're out to get you. It eliminates introspection, muhasabah, the self-audit. Sit down for 5 minutes and think about, what am I doing? فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ? Where am I going? What have I done? It eliminates personal responsibility. The Prophet ﷺ said, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. Or كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. All of you are a shepherd, and all of you will be questioned. All of you are responsible for your flock. Who are your flock? Your intellect, your faculties, your limbs, your children, your spouses, your parents. You'll be questioned. Personal responsibility. These ideas coming out of the university, they promote self-victimization. And to play the victim, according to Roger Scruton, is an assault on rationality in the public discourse. It is a cop-out. It is lazy. We must take ownership for ourselves. We must stop blaming other people for our problems. The Prophet ﷺ did not victimize himself. One of my teachers mentioned the Satan versus Adam paradigm, the satanic versus Adamic paradigm. That Shaitan, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expelled him from the garden, he said, فَبِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي. Because you caused me to err, you did this, I will lie in wait for them, your servants. I'll come at them from all directions. Shifts responsibility. Victimizes himself. You did this. It's like there's, why would Allah create people like that? Why did Allah do that? Wallahu yaf'alu ma yurid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do whatever He wants. Who the heck are you to question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Nothing. You don't need to exist. If you died tomorrow, your neighbor will be eating his Cheerios. And he'll think for a second, oh, that guy died? Can you pass the milk? You're not that important. Really. Sorry to be so expressive. But Adam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a doer of everything. That's the theological point. He does everything. But look at the attitude. Because you did this to me. That's Shaitan. What Adam alayhi salam? Rabbana and Eve. Rabbana is in the plural. This is a first person common plural. So Eve alayhi salam is also making this dua. Rabbana zalamna anfusana wa in lam taghfir lana wa tarhamna lanakunanna min al-khasirin. Oh our Lord, we wronged ourselves. And if you don't have mercy on us, we'll be lost. See the difference? One self-victimizes. One makes tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The most dangerous thing about this philosophy coming out of these universities, it cuts off tawbah. Because if there's no objective morality, you can't break any moral laws. There's no need for tawbah. It's like, well, even though he's a Christian, the President Trump, who was asked, have you ever asked God for forgiveness? I don't feel the need to. I don't think I've ever been wrong. Okay. Interesting. These postmodernist ideas cause major conflicts between human beings, pinning them against each other in a never-ending grab for power. Black man against white man, male against female, rich against poor. To paraphrase Professor Jordan Peterson, and I tend to agree with him on this point. If you're sitting in a university classroom and you hear things like white privilege, toxic masculinity, oppressive patriarchy, cultural appropriation, mansplaining, intersectionality, you should know that you are being ideologically and politically groomed. That is more properly indoctrination than education. Don't play the dirty game of identity politics. We need to interrogate ideas irrespective of the identity of the person who is espousing those ideas. In other words, treat people as individuals, not as part of groups. That doesn't work anymore. I'll give you a story. I gave a lecture one time, and I said something about Christianity in the lecture. And a brother from the audience, after the lecture, he's a convert, he came up to me and he said, "You should never talk about Christianity." He doesn't know anything about my background. I said, "Why not?" He said, "Because you were never Christian." I said, "Well, I have an MA in New Testament, I have a PhD in comparative religion." He said, "It doesn't matter. You are not allowed to talk about Christianity because you were never a Christian." I said, "Oh, well, what did I say? Did I say something wrong?" "No, what you said was correct." Okay? Look, if a straight, white Christian man criticizes Islam or Muslims, that does not make him a racist. It is a non sequitur argument. Don't play the dirty game. I actually agree with Sam Harris on this one. You remember what happened on Bill Maher's show with Batman? Batfleck? Ben Affleck. So Sam Harris was criticizing Islam, and he said, "That's racist." It's not racist. Islam is a set of ideas. It's not a race. People can criticize it. Don't be so quick to jump the gun and call people racist. That's a cop-out. That doesn't work. That's a weakness. And if you say that a white man is not allowed to speak about Islam, that ironically is racism. Look at his statement. If it's wrong, rip it apart. Don't rip him apart. Don't go after the man. Don't be ad hominem. Look at the argument. Sometimes ad hominem is effective in rhetoric, but it has to be tempered. Now we have postmodernists talking about the elimination of hierarchical structures, even within the family unit. This is what they learn in social sciences classes. Because, according to them, gender roles are an oppressive social construct and just another manifestation of the evil patriarchy. And if Judith Butler at UC Berkeley says it, then it must be true. She's the one that always wins the award for the most incoherent book ever written. Every year she wins it. And check this out. Postmodernist professor Andrea Dworkin compared a married woman to being a man's, quote, chattel. She said, quote, a normal man operates in the mode of predation, end quote. In other words, a normal man is a predator. And this is what college students are reading. So a further assault upon traditional marriage and a reinforcement of the man versus woman paradigm. You see, our religion does not pit men against women in some radically antagonistic battle of the sexes. They're not in competition. They excel in different areas and complement each other. You ever heard the hadith, half my deen? Right? You're not a complete person unless you're married. Based on their khalq, based on their biology, their hard wirings. Where it suits them, postmodernists pretend like biology doesn't exist and everything's a social construct. There is some social construction, but it is limited. It is certainly not everything. In our tradition, men and women are equal spiritually, but not the same biologically. You ready for the... And I forgot to give the disclaimer. My views do not necessarily represent those of NCC. I'm going to drop the bomb on you. Ready? There are not equal rights in the Sharia. There are not equal rights in the Sharia, but equitable rights. وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. And for her are rights equitable, and for her are rights similar to what is against her, equitable, according to what is known, self-evident. For example, a woman must cover her head. Do I have to cover my head? Do I have to? We have unequal rights. It's by definition unequal. A man can marry 4 women Can a woman marry 4 men? A man must support his wife financially. Can he elect not to and have his wife support him financially? A woman is excused from prayer during her menses. You see, we live in reality. We live in reality. These gender theorists and social justice activists, SJW, social justice warriors, they live in La La Land. They live, and I don't mean Los Angeles. Some of them do, though. Some of them even say that men and women are exactly the same, even physically. I'd like to see where this goes. Right? Because I want LeBron James to wake up tomorrow morning. I want him to say, you know what? Gender is a social construct. I feel like a woman. I'm going to join the WNBA. Good luck. I think Will Chamberlain's record is going down. There's a mixed martial arts fighter named Fallon Fox, biologically male, but identifies as a woman, and is sending women to the hospital, beating women up. This is a man. He has the frame of a man. Men have bone density that's thicker, huge head, incredible muscles. Sending these women to the hospital, they can't say anything. If you say, oh, this is a man, oh, you're a transphobe, you're a bigot, and so on and so forth. Remember this guy, John McEnroe? He was I heard him on TV today. It's a U.S. Open, the commentator. He got into some hot water because he was on a radio show, and he said, you know, I think Serena Williams is the greatest female tennis player of all time. That's what he said. That comment got him in hot water. Isn't that a compliment?
Yeah.
The host said, what do you mean by that? It's like, what? He did like Hillary Clinton. What? What? Why didn't you say she's the greatest, period? And he said, because
She's a female.
she's not. And then Serena Williams was asked later, if you played with the men, how would you fare? She said, I wouldn't even be in the top 100. That's it. But people want to equalize. I mean, if you mean she's the greatest pound for pound, you know how they say, like, what's the guy, Mayweather? Mayweather is the greatest boxer pound for pound. Meaning all things being equal, he's better than, let's say, Mike Tyson or Muhammad Ali. Right? If she meant it like that, no, she didn't mean it like that. Just say she's the best ever. But she's not. Interesting. Men and women differ physically. They process emotion differently. Usually, women process emotion better than men. Their brains work differently. Their brains are different sizes. They have different interests. Men have more interest in things, women with people. That's why little boys tend to play with trucks, and women with dolls, girls with dolls. You heard the Scandinavian studies, right? Or if you look at countries in Scandinavia, and Dr. Peterson also brings this up a lot. Very interesting study, because European studies are interesting because there isn't a lot of religious baggage there. They're not very religious people. And ethnically, it's very homogenous. So there's incredible equality in these countries, as it were, between the sexes. And it shows that when people are left to their own devices, women gravitate towards traditional female occupations. And men gravitate towards traditional male occupations. There are 20 male engineers to every one female engineer in these Scandinavian countries. There are 20 teachers and caretakers and nurses to every. The fictional comes through. You can see that. It's very interesting. Gender roles are determined by biology. Women are naturally better caregivers than men. Again, that statement there will get me thrown out of a psychology, sociology, anthropology class. How do we know that? Well, they have breasts. That's one thing, right? That's just obvious, right? Men are more suited for manual labor. That's why men have 40% more upper body strength than women on average. Right? I saw a guy today at the U.S. Open. He hit the ball 140 miles an hour on a serve. Even the Fed was like, whoa. You know what the Fed is, right? He's the goat. Men deal with stress. Men deal with stress better, yet they have shorter lifespans. But they process emotion in a worse way. Multiple studies have shown that the IQs of men are less predictable than that of women. Men are all over the place in the IQ. Women tend to cluster around the mean. We are different because we complete each other. The reality is, men need women. Charles University, which is in Prague. Again, European studies are very, very interesting. Study done on married couples, Charles University. They found that marriages in which one spouse was dominant, by dominant I don't mean oppressive, I mean they had the final authority, the recognized leader in the household. The study found that marriages where one spouse was dominant were the happiest of marriages. And 77% of them were male-dominated. So there's a good reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa." That men are the supporters or maintainers, men stand over women. There's a reason why Paul says in the New Testament, I don't agree with everything that Paul says, he says the head of the woman is the man, the head of man is Christ, the head of Christ is God. These texts were not written by misogynists trying to oppress women. They were written in accordance with reality. That leads to greater happiness, according to secular studies done in 2016, 17, 18. Hierarchies work. They are part of life. Most of the time, they're based on competence, not biological factors, not power dynamics. They work in the market, they work in the workplace, in the military, they work at school, and in the household. Now here's another problem. Young men are constantly being told that they are violent rapists. Now, it is true that men are a lot more violent than women. If you look at the prison population, 90 to 95% of prisoners are men. And again, that's because women tend to deal with their emotions in healthier ways than men. Right? The answer, however, is not to feminize men. It's very interesting that testosterone levels are down 30% from just 30 years ago. 30%. Men are becoming more and more effeminate. They're eating more and more soy. Don't eat soy. Soy increases estrogen. It's given to postmenopausal women. Don't eat soy. I was taking these men vitamins for a while. And I was like, let me just look at the ingredients. First ingredient, organic soy flour. 2-pointer into the garbage. Don't eat soy. Soy sales in 1992, soy food sales in 1992 were 300 million in the U.S. Now they're 4 billion. 4 billion. It is feminizing men. You see, masculinity is like a martial art. So masculinity gravitates towards risk-taking, ambition, assertiveness, competition, and physicality. It's like a martial art. It can be used to murder, rape, oppress, but also to protect and defend. If men are feminized, who will check the oppressors? We need strong, highly masculine men. We need them. The answer is not to feminize them. The answer is to reform the masculinity and be truly masculine. And women actually prefer masculine men, despite what you've heard. She'll pick a woman at random. You want this guy? You know, very, very, very thin with skinny jeans. You know, he's got a pink jacket on. And got a little love patch. Sorry if people have frosted tips. Sorry if people have that. Or do you want this guy? He's got, you know, he's muscular and, you know, he's got a deep voice. He plays rugby. Be honest. Just need to be honest. That's the problem. Now, social constructionists are taking it to even crazier levels. Now the trend is that children are seen as equal to parents in the household. There are 7, 8, and 9-year-old children with gender dysphoria demanding hormone therapy from their parents, and their parents giving into the pressure. Never mind the fact that hormone therapy sterilizes children, and that out of the small fraction of children that have gender dysphoria, 80% of them grow out of it. It's a phase that they come out of naturally. Sayyidina Ali said, childhood is a type of junoon, is a type of insanity. They're children for a reason. We don't listen to children. A child who wants to touch a stove, right? You don't say, well, okay, no. But I want to be a boy. Like my daughter, 4 years old, like last year, she wanted to be Minnie Mouse. So what do? Start pumping her with mouse hormones? Hey, the new generation, they know better than us. 80% of them grow out of it. 80%. Right? And those that don't grow out of it become incredibly suicidal. Can't go back. I mean, maybe you could. I don't know. I'll end with 2 pieces of advice for Muslims in colleges and universities. Now, going back to activism, and I give you sincere advice. You can take it or leave it. Maybe you don't agree with a thing I said today. That's fine. I don't really care. And if I've offended you, don't care. Beware of activists. This is my first piece of advice. Beware of activists. Now, tempered activism is effective. That activism without sacred ilm, without tazkiyatun nafs, right, purification of the self, is very, very dangerous. You're in college to gain knowledge, to grow intellectually, not to become these radicalized neo-Marxist activists. To paraphrase a wise man, if you're going to march down the street and shout at people and wave signs, you have to really make sure that the evil is truly outside of you and not in your own heart. Now, quite often, activists who claim to be working for our best interests as Western Muslims are actually harming us as they ignorantly or deliberately antagonize entire groups of people, the vast majority of whom are totally innocent of any wrongdoing. Their postmodern race-baiting, rhetoric of power, identity politics, and obsession for earthly justice actually serves to galvanize groups of people against our Muslim communities, people who otherwise would have no problems with us. And not only do they contribute to our society's polarization, they also tend to misrepresent us as they form alliances with organizations and individuals whose positions about God, morality, and human life are disturbing, to say the very least. They are the quintessential products of the postmodernist university system. Beware of them. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, أَكْرِمُوا الْعُلَمَاءَ فَإِنَّهُمْ وَرَثَةُ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ فَمَنْ أَكْرَمَهُمْ فَقَدْ أَكْرَمَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Honor the scholars. They are the inheritors of the prophets. Whoever honors the scholars honors Allah and His Messenger. Follow activist scholars. Activist scholars. People who have traditional training. People who are not going to do more damage than good. Second piece of advice, form alliances with and brotherhoods and sisterhoods with Christians and Jews on campus. I think it's time for the people of faith, the children of Abraham, to come together. This is how we can change the monoculture of postmodern universities. In my opinion, in the English-speaking world, the Ahmadidat days are over. Maybe in the Farsi-speaking world, there's some utility for that. We can still debate, obviously, but with sophistication and academic rigor, not with hardcore polemics, and this is obviously a Quranic imperative. But at the end of the day, we must maintain a strong sense of respect for and solidarity with the Ahlul Kitab, because they are experiencing what we experience in these universities. They embrace the God of Moses and Jesus. They honor Abrahamic morality. When we attack Jews and Christians and disrespect their beliefs, their scriptures and traditions, we are playing right into the hands of the postmodernists. They want us to eat each other. They're setting a trap for us, and we walk right into it. All this talk about banning the Bible and whatnot, you say, well, that has nothing to do with us. Soon it will. You'll see. People going into, homosexual people going purposely into Christian bakeries, right, and trying to run them out of business. In Catholicism, marriage is a sacrament. You don't mess around with sacraments. And this is different than like if a black person comes into your bakery and you kick them out. Because then you're totally judging them based on their physical appearance. But here it's the action that they want the baker to condone. It's an action. It's not based on their appearance. Right? In other words, one of the Christian bakers, he said, look, if they came in and say, bake me a birthday cake, I would do it. But if you say, bake me a wedding cake, that's a sacrament. I can't violate that. I'll go to hell. I don't care what he says. And this person won. He took it to the Supreme Court and he won. They won for now. So, I used to teach at St. Mary's College, which is a Catholic college. And Christian students would come to me all the time for advice. And I would just quote the New Testament to them. If the world hates you, Christ said, speaking to the disciples, if the world hates you, remember it hated me first. That's the nature of the dunya. The ahlul dunya always hate the ahlullah. The geocentric, as it were, always hate the theocentric. So when apostasy increases, depression increases, despair increases, we have to give people hope, give them a sense of purpose, a goal. People nowadays are emotionally incontinent. A lot of it is due to social media addiction, right? It's that dopamine, that like, you get that little hit of dopamine. My advice is, and I practice what I preach, get off completely of Facebook. Completely get off. Get off of all social media. That's just my advice. Maybe it's not practical for you. So, but, self-control. Dr. Sachs, he said that the greatest indicator of success of a person later in life is self-control as a child. Self-control. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. We all have, most of us have children. This is a big problem in all the houses. There are no exceptions. It's a big issue. Right? Barakallahu khairan.